If you're a guy in your 40s who's interested in improving your overall fitness, including muscle and strength, you've likely heard this at some point. Bodybuilding isn't functional. It's for show. It's a vanity metric. It does not transfer over to function in real life or in sports. But the question that guys don't often ask is, functional compared to what? Because if your goal is to improve the way your body looks, improve your overall physical resilience, improve body composition, then bodybuilding could be more functional than a lot of people think. Or it could also have gaps that could slowly erode your overall function over time. If you're new here, my name is Aaron Kubitz. I'm the founder of Functional Aesthetics of Eau Claire. For over 20 years, I've helped busy men to gain muscle, lose fat, and become more athletic without living their life in the gym. Over that time, I've learned one thing. Most training methods are not wrong, but most are incomplete. In today's video, we're going to look at what bodybuilding does really well, where it falls short, when it can be a really good method for improving your function, and when it is not. Before we can say whether or not bodybuilding is functional, we first need to determine what we mean by functional. We need to define the word functional. Now, if you ask most guys, they would say training that I can use outside of the gym, training that makes me better in everyday life. That's not wrong, but it's also a very narrow scope for functional. It's incomplete. See, if we look at the actual definition of functional, it simply just means fit for the intended use. And by that definition, if we look at bodybuilding, bodybuilding could be extremely functional for increasing muscle size, increasing overall balance and symmetry to avoid muscle imbalances and overuse injuries, and it could also be extremely functional for improving body composition. So as you can see, bodybuilding is functional in certain contexts, fit for the intended use of building more muscle, improving your body composition, and the overall balance between different muscle groups. But what about other disciplines? What about maximizing your strength? What about speed and power? What about endurance? What about your activities outside of the gym? Does bodybuilding tend to add to these things? Does it detract for them? Or does it remain neutral? To answer that question, we need to dig deeper into the different things that bodybuilding develops. And it goes beyond just the muscle, the body composition, and the muscular balance. The first one we're going to look at, though, is muscle balance. So, unlike many sports, which have a specific focus of improving your performance in a specific physical capacity. Let's say, for example, somebody who's a runner, right? It's well known that runners often develop very tight hamstrings, which then can often lead to some back pain. You get a lot of this repetitive overuse injuries in various different sports from doing the same movement over and over again. Now, there is benefit to doing that, just like Bruce Lee said. He says, "I do not fear the man who's practiced 10,000 different kicks, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." Just like Mr. Miyagi with the wax on, wax off. The more you do the thing, the better you tend to get at that pattern. It's the mind-muscle connection, that neural pathway being developed, so it's so strong. And to use another quote from Bruce Lee, when he says, holds up his fist and he says, "I do not hit, it hits all by itself." Meaning that before he doesn't have to actually analyze and think about how I'm going to go about doing this. He's done the thing, the pattern so many times that when the occasion and when the environment is appropriate for the use of that physical ability, his body just responds instantaneously. So that can be beneficial in the context of that sport. Where it is a detriment is that when you are developing that same pattern so much that you fail to focus on other physical abilities. Namely, if we go back to the running analogy, where you have overly tight hamstrings. So a runner, if he wanted to maybe counteract that a little bit, would ride a bicycle to build up his quadriceps a little bit more, right? He might focus on spending some time in the gym doing some heavy back squats, right? To help to balance his body out. Same thing with other sports. Now, given that bodybuilding, its primary goal is to have the most aesthetic, symmetrical body where you have no muscle groups overpowering the other ones, right? When you have your biceps are not way bigger than the triceps, right? Your chest muscles aren't pulling you around this way and making you look like really good from the front, and then when you go to do a back to double biceps pose, you have no back development, right? Having a big upper body and having chicken legs or no lower body, right? Being able to, deadlift a massive amount of weight, but having no strength in the upper body for bench pressing, overhead pressing, those kind of things, right? And so in their pursuit of having a complete, balanced, symmetrical looking physique, bodybuilders tend to train in a more holistic, balanced way than many other sports do, and in the process maintain what we call structural integrity, right? You don't have one muscle exerting more stress on one side of the joint than the other. You have equal stress on both sides, keeps the musculoskeletal structure in proper balance. And so from that standpoint, bodybuilding is very useful for making you more functional in everyday life. Now, one of the most surprising things that for guys to hear when it comes to bodybuilding is that bodybuilding can provide very similar effects cardiovascularly, or for your heart and your lungs and your overall vascular system, as traditional aerobic exercise. It's not exactly the same as running, biking, or rowing because the mechanics are different, right? Running is, to a certain extent, a whole body movement. Yes, it's primarily your legs, but it's a coordinated movement, right? So it's going to be different than if you're doing back squats, lunges, rows, etc. Now, but if you look at the nature of how bodybuilding workouts are typically structured, depending on how you go about doing bodybuilding training. So if you're going for the thing that's been hotly debated recently, where we have the high intensity training, right? Mike Mentzer, Arthur Jones, Dorian Yates come to mind when we think about this, where you're doing one all-out set to failure, right? You do a couple of things to warm up to that, and then you just take it to failure, and maybe do like intensifying things after that to take it beyond failure, right? In this context, you're probably not going to be getting a very good cardiovascular effect. On the other hand, if you train like, say, in the style of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Serge Nubret, I remember back in, maybe about 10, 15 years ago, I was doing one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's old workouts where you're doing the supersets, right? And he would do his chest and his back. So you do flat bench press, bent over barbell row, and you're basically going back to back between different exercises with, almost no rest in between the exercises. So you're keeping a constant stress on the cardiovascular system. The heart rate is always staying elevated while you're doing this. So, and you're also able to provide a moderate level of intensity as well while you're doing this, because while the chest muscles are resting, you're training the back muscles. So you can be continuously working the whole time. And a lot of guys like this because it helps you to save time as well. But the other side benefit of it is that you are also getting somewhat of a cardiovascular workout at the same time you are getting a hypertrophic stimulus as well. Now, an area or a couple of areas where bodybuilding is perhaps not functional, at least not directly, is where it comes to maximal strength or explosive strength, right? Strength, as I've talked about in other videos, is a skill, right? Therefore, you need to actually train your body to express that skill. Bodybuilding training by nature, because the key driver of muscular growth is total volume that you're doing, you tend to be working in a more moderate level of intensity for a higher amount of reps and sets than you do if you are training for, say, like powerlifting or strongman, right? Where you're exerting a lot of force, but you're not doing it many times because obviously your body cannot express a high amount of force as many times as it can lower amounts of force, right? And so it doesn't mean that a bodybuilder cannot possess a lot of strength, right? I think I talked about in a previous video with the example of Franco Columbu, right? Franco Columbu was a bodybuilder, very, aesthetic, muscular, lean physique, but he was also incredibly strong. The reason why he had both is because he actually trained himself to be strong by actually lifting heavy stuff. And so if you're training primarily just for the building the size and then you never train for strength, yes, it's not going to be that functional for that. But bodybuilding tends to be a great foundation to then go and be able to lift more weight. Because although the correlation between size and strength is not a pure one-to-one correlation where for every pound of muscle that you gain, you are going to get that much. Like if you doubled your muscle mass, that you would be twice as strong as you were before. It doesn't work that way. But you will definitely be stronger if you get bigger, if you continue to train for strength. And so that's why bodybuilding, it can, depending on what your ultimate goals are, is often a great way, a great foundational piece, and actually in my hybrid strength system does precede the heavier lifting components where we want to do some volume training, do the muscular hypertrophy training to then give you better potential, give you better results when you actually start lifting heavy later. Now, the other piece is speed and power, right? Explosive strength. Bodybuilding, you're not using momentum, right? It's strict, it's controlled, right? There can be a little bit of momentum, For example, you see sometimes with Arnold Schwarzenegger, he'd be doing some curls, right? And for example, let's say he's got the curls like this or whatever. And people will be like, man, he's swinging all over the place, right? But you notice that the descent was controlled. And when he's bringing it back up, he's using enough momentum that he doesn't have to artificially hold his body so rigid that he can't actually fully use the bicep muscle, appropriately, right? They would have the arm blaster thing too to isolate that. But there's different purposes for different kinds of things. And you think about in terms of, if we're talking about functionality here, right? When you're running or performing functional tasks, you're swinging a hammer or something like that, right? When you're running, you're not isolating yourself like this. There is a bit of swing, there is a bit of momentum and stuff like that, and it's coordinated. So the key here is when you're doing that, do you have control over how you're doing it? But with that being said, there is, nowhere near the amount of momentum involved or the acceleration component when it comes to bodybuilding as there is with something like Olympic lifting, sprinting, or jumping, throwing a shot put, a discus, etc., right? And so for that purpose, bodybuilding is not the best way to go about becoming more explosive and more powerful, right? Can it help you to increase your joint resilience, increase your overall body resilience to these stresses? Absolutely. And that's why it's if you plan to go and do some more explosive things, do some power training, which I do recommend even for older guys, you don't want to jump straight into that. You want to go in a stepwise fashion where you are allowing time for your tendons, ligaments, and the overall musculoskeletal system to build up the resilience to be able to handle rapid force production that happens when you're sprinting, when you're jumping, etc. If you have been outside of the gym for, months, years, it's maybe been 20 years since you lifted in high school or college, and then you're like, well, I heard sprinting is really good for you, or power training is good for you as you age, so I'm going to go do a bunch of this. Well, yeah, then you're setting yourself up for injury, right? Even if you've been away from structured training for a couple of months, you know, it would be better to come back in and slowly build yourself back up to that point, because again, it is true that the older you get, your connective tissues do have a less elasticity. You do produce less collagen. You do have less blood flow to these areas, and therefore, you need to be a little bit more cautious about how you do it. Doesn't mean avoid it. It means that you need to be smart about how you train it. So in summary, bodybuilding is great for establishing a foundation. It'll improve your overall health. It's one of the safest ways to improve your fitness, right? It is also one of the best ways to improve the way your body looks for both men and women, right? And but when it comes to other aspects of being functional, right? In other words, functional from the definition of, does it improve my life outside of the gym? Does it improve my ability to, you know, lift awkward objects? You know, if I'm moving furniture, if I'm, you know, moving stuff around in my backyard that, you know, I want to move a rock, I want to move a log, I want to, you know, chase my kids around, play some sports, play some basketball with my son, you know? Well, then bodybuilding, you might be strong, you might be in good shape, but then you realize, oh, I you know, strained a tendon, I pulled a ligament or whatever, when I'm doing these other activities that require more than the things that bodybuilding is functional at, such as the joint integrity, the muscular balance, the muscular, to a certain extent, muscular endurance, building more muscle, decreasing body fat, those kind of things. So if you're looking for things outside of that, then you're going to need to look at other disciplines as well. That's why I'm a very strong believer in not being a specialist and just training in one discipline, but rather doing a little bit of all of them and working them into your routine in such a way that they improve, that each discipline does not interfere with the other one, and instead allows you to maintain a respectable capacity in explosive strength, in maximal strength, and in your hypertrophy, your endurance, and your overall health. Hey, if you're a man over 40 who wants to continue to train seriously, you want to continue remaining strong, lean, and athletic without feeling beat up all the time, go ahead and hit subscribe. This is the place where I teach guys how to stay lean, stay strong, stay athletic without spending all their time at the gym and without beating their body up in the process. If you got some value out of this video, go ahead and hit that like button as well, so more guys just like you can come to this video and learn how to train their body in a more sustainable way after 40. I will see you all in the next video.